Well, here we are, and this is a bonus podcast of a Thursday evening. We don't usually afford both our listeners and viewers this luxury, but today we have a special guest with us, and that is Chris Donnelly. You're welcome, Chris.
Thanks very much, Jude, and thanks for having me, both of you. I feel like I'm in wonderful company here, so
you silver-tongued devil.
Honored to get the invite.
Hey, you must have refreshed, Chris. You should have gone into politics.
Well, what we're basically going to talk about here is not what everybody else is talking about, Ukraine, but the situation in terms of seats in the Assembly now, and seats that we can expect if the Assembly is resurrected after the election in May. So could we start with that, Chris? You probably are more across this than us, or me anyway. What's the biggest, is Sinn Féin the biggest party on Stormont at the moment?
No, from the 2017 election, if you recall, Jude, you had it was a bit of an earthquake because for the first time Unionism lost its majority in terms of the number of the composition of the Assembly. And that was the first election to the Assembly when it was reduced to 90 seats from the 108. So you have 40 unionists now. There's been movement within the DUP with a resignation, but still 40 nominal unionists and 39 national. So from 2017, you had 28 DUP and 27 Sinn Féin. You did have the Alex Easton resignation in North Down, which, of course, on paper then would say there's 27 of each Sinn Féin and the DUP at the moment. And then you had 12 SDLP, 10 Ulster Unionists, and Jim Allister, of course, the solitary TUV rep, and Claire Sugden is the independent unionist there.
Yeah. Well, the opinion polls, the last one that I could see, it's probably out of date already, but the last one that I could see was talking in terms of Sinn Féin getting something like 25% of the vote and the DUP only getting 17%, and then on down with UUP 14, Alliance 14, TUV 12, and SDLP down at the very bottom with 11. Has there been a recent poll on that, do you know?
Jude, there's been a couple of polls and they've been around that. I mean, the main thing coming from the polls, there's kind of two. One is no matter which poll, and I have to say, I always I don't want to say suspicious, but I'm not overly trustworthy of polls in the north of Ireland. But at the same time, you can get a gist, you can get a general direction from them. Yeah. And certainly the pattern from the polls here for the last, for a good while now, has been that Sinn Féin seem to be the largest party in terms of popular vote. And there is a gap still between them and the DUP. And of course, the read across from that is, it's one thing to have that in terms of popular votes. The key thing will be, will that translate into more seats for Sinn Féin than the DUP? Because, of course, that will mean that Sinn Féin are entitled to the First Minister. And by the way, I use that word entitled very carefully because one of the difficulties in our society is the gravity of entitlement within political unionism, which means that if that scenario does arise, then we could be in for a crisis for months while it takes political unionism to come to terms with the notion that they're not automatically entitled to the First Minister's
Chris, what would you, that's the biggest word in the English dictionary, if Sinn Féin became the largest party, what do you think the outcome of that? No, and I'm asking that in the question, all the polls, as Jude pointed out, look like Sinn Féin are moving in that direction, the biggest party. And you look at it and you sort of say, God, that's seismic. If Sinn Féin, when you're looking at this, I'll put it this way, about 20 years ago, they were on 2% in the South. They're now heading to be the biggest party in the South. So if they are the biggest party in the South and the biggest party in the North, what do you read into that?
I suppose there's several things to read into that. One really is the vindication of, and really it was Gerry Adams. Gerry Adams is political electoral strategy of taking what was then militant republicanism from the mid-1980s, and you could see it, looking back, the direction of travel was very clear, from the abstentionism debate within the Dáil to the movement within, before that, to actually contesting elections. That was it the 1982 Assembly election was the first one Sinn Féin contested. I think at that time, did the opinion polls have Sinn Féin on 1%?
Okay.
And they got 10% in that, so it tells a story there too. But really, so I think that there will be a sense, the vindication of that vision that Adams had of taking Sinn Féin in a certain direction, but making it maybe in the here and now. It tells you that the party, and the party which is most committed to the achievement of Irish unity, that's their DNA, that's their raison d'etre, is very much in chiming with very significant part, because obviously you can't use the word majority, because obviously they're not majority. Even they get 25%, it's a quarter. But the point is they would be the most popular party across the island. And that would be transformative, because what you're already seeing over the last couple of years, Pat and Jude, is Leo Varadkar's talking about Irish unity, Simon Coveney, Neil Richmond, Jim O'Callaghan even went to Oxford, didn't he? Or was it King? I forget which one of those, Oxbridge, certainly one of them, to deliver a speech. So it's now become mainstream in a way that, being so with conviction beyond the Fourth Green Field rhetoric in favor of Irish unity, and actually now being committed to doing something substantively to achieve it. That's now mainstream. And I think that's probably going to be the most significant consequence, Pat, of it. Sinn Féin's success will make others say, what are they doing? What do we need to do? If it's going to be having more of a...
If you look at four out of the 6 counties already got nationalist majority. Unionism is not the biggest party now in the Assembly. Come the next, maybe Westminster elections, there could be a shift there as well. So is the tide running one? Well, really what I'm getting at, is it too good to be true for Sinn Féin? Myself and Jude have had this discussion before. What seems, are the polls, as opinion polls as opposed to electoral polls, they always seem to do very well. And then, of course, in the last couple of weeks, there's a cry for unionist unity, and the DUP and everybody suddenly runs and they're all voting again. It's the orange and the green card gets played, and then something happens.
Well, what I would say is that I think you need to be careful. I don't think there is an inevitability about Sinn Féin, for instance, taking the First Minister post. I certainly don't. I don't believe the TUV are going to end up with anything like 10, 11, 12%. I think that would be seismic change within unionism if that significant cohort within unionist community voted for the TUV. Jim Allister, he gets a lot of airtime. Yeah, he's got his legal background and all the rest of it. But when push comes to shove, he's one name in a ballot paper in North Antrim. There's going to be a lot of I don't want to maybe say what I think maybe of some of the candidates they're going to have in other constituencies, but suffice to say, I think that some unionists will take a look at them and think, nah, that's not for me. I'm going back to the DUP. So I think that it's more than likely that the TUV vote at the moment is being significantly inflated within the polls. And Jeffrey Donaldson's strategy is going to be clear between now and the election. It's going to be saying on the doorstep, his people are going to say, well, if you're going to have a protest vote for the TUV, get used to First Minister Michelle O'Neill. Is that what you want? And I think that's going to be quite effective. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that we will. I think it's going to be extremely tight. If Sinn Féin take the First Minister post, it's more than likely going to be by 1 or 2 seats. And from their end, you've both probably noticed a more nuanced approach from Sinn Féin over the last few months. I think that they've had a very deliberate press strategy, which is saying, say nothing. Leave the airtime to unionism, let them fight it out. Try to stay out of any controversy. So when unionist politicians have tried to pick fights over stones at Stormont or colouring, lighting up buildings or different things, the initial Sinn Féin response was, well, we're going to veto that because Stormont is hardly a shared space. Belfast City Hall is not a shared space. And I make those very points myself quite regularly. It's absolutely ridiculous to say that there's an injustice that there's not another unionist monument at Stormont. But what's interesting is, if you notice the way that Mary Lou McDonald handled the whole situation around congratulating the Queen on 70 years of public service, it was very gracious. It was about, I think Mary Lou's thinking, I'm going to be Taoiseach soon. I'm going to have to get used to saying and doing a lot more than this. But it was also, in an electoral and political sense at the moment, for Michelle O'Neill, it's exactly the right line, because Sinn Féin, if they're going to get across the line, they need a lot of transfers. First of all, they need their vote to come out. And they also need a significant number of transfers. And if you think back, if you think back to that last European election, what was striking is, the SDLP candidate, when it was eliminated, I think it was significantly more transfers went Alliance than Sinn Féin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you look at other constituencies, if you look at Fermanagh South Tyrone, I think the last election there, when the SDLP candidate was eliminated, again, significant breakdown. I think it was to the Ulster Unionists as opposed to Sinn Féin. So there's a job of work that Sinn Féin know they've got to do, and that's also why they try to position very strategically on that progressive coalition front, because again, when you're getting into that nail biter to hold on to the 5th seat that they managed to get that last election in so many constituencies, they need to get a higher percentage transfers than they normally would have done.
Chris, are you saying that despite the fact that Sinn Féin in percentage terms and opinion polls are at least 5%, let's say, ahead of the DUP, that they'll still be lucky to squeak home with a majority of seats, or with 1 or 2 above the Unionists, above the DUP in particular?
Yeah, for 2 reasons, Jude. Firstly, because I don't believe that gap is as real. I don't believe that's the real gap. I believe that TUV vote, the TUV are registered 9, 10, 11, 12%. That's going to be, that's a devastating blow to the DUP if that really happens on the day. But more likely, I mean, again, it might, maybe with the protocol and everything else going on with unionism, it is possible. But again, Jim Allister's one name. He's on a ballot paper in one constituency. You've got nobodies as far as unionists are concerned in other constituencies running, and maybe some of their candidates, maybe they're not going to be overly attractive, let's put it nicely. So the DUP are more than likely going to make up that gap to some degree, Jude. And then it comes into transfer. And, the unionist mantra, all the unionist unity, 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter what divides us.
Could I cut across you for a second there? Would you not have people who would say, look, I'm not going to vote for the TUV, but I'm not going to vote for the DUP either, because they're making a screw up of everything. Jeffrey Donaldson looks as if he was going to join the UUP. I'm going to give my vote to the UUP. We did not expect them to do particularly well, and DUP to do maybe not as well as they have.
I think that's kind of the very intriguing on the unionist side. That's going to be the intriguing aspect. What will the attempt to present a kinder unionism through Doug Beattie-led Ulster Unionist Party, the Union of People stuff, will that actually resonate? I suspect that there are a lot people within unionism who people who would be openly pro-unionists, but who were very awkward over a decade or so about the dinosaur-like positions adopted by the Ulster Unionists, as well as the DUP, on a plethora of issues, and that maybe moved to Alliance. I suspect that the Ulster Unionists are going to win some of those people back pretty quickly. Now, difficulty there is that's not as large a pool to swim in as the DUP TUV vote. If you put the DUP and TUV vote together, that's still a big majority within unionism. So I think that Ulster Unionists are more likely to take from the Alliance fringe as opposed to eating, because the DUP are going to be hard at this message, Jude, of look, you're going to put Sinn Féin top dog. You're going to put them on the top, and look at all. Look what's going to happen. They're going to have Irish signs everywhere. You look at the nonsense that'll be talked on the doorstep where nothing's being recorded will be unreal. So I think, and the difficulty, of course, is that might resonate. Again, add that DUP and TUV together. Do you think it'll really break down at to be 10, 11, 12% TUV to 18 DUP? Or is it more likely going to break 24 DUP, 6 TUV, in which case Sinn Féin and DUP might actually be quite close?
But sorry, go ahead, Pat. Go ahead. I'll come back to you.
No, I was really what I was going to say, Chris. That's right, isn't what you said. But right here, if you're asked to sort of, hey, right, Chris, put your reputation on the line. What's your prediction? Come May, what is May 7th or something? What is it? know the way things are going now, are you saying that unionism is so much in flux that it could go to the alliance one way, the TUV the other, and God knows whatever you're having yourself somewhere else?
No, I don't think that it's going to be unionism necessarily that's going to go. I mean, I think that, you know, the headlines coming into the election, the headline narrative is who's going to take the first minister position.
Yeah.
Okay. I suspect that the other side of the election, the big talking point will be the growth of the others, because, you know, the alliance are sitting on 8 seats from 2017.
Yeah.
Now that, you know, if they get anywhere near the vote they got for Europe, or indeed even for the local elections, then they could get 14, they could get 13, 14, 15, even 16, you know, because the thing that Alliance has that nobody else has is they'll attract transfers from all over the place. So they just need to get enough first preference votes, their candidates above other people. And then as people are eliminated, they just rise and rise and rise.
Yeah.
So for instance, Sinn Féin would have reason to be worried about losing out to the alliance in North Antrim. They're worried about that. You know, the numbers are very clear there. There's other constituencies where alliance could be taken from, you know, DUP, UUP, south down. It's Sinn Féin or SDLP would have most to lose from the alliance. And again, if you look at North Belfast, it'll be an upset if the alliance don't take one of the 2 Sinn Féin seats in North Belfast. Yeah. So you know, their alliance are going to chip away from, probably for the first time ever, alliance are going to chip more from the nationalist side than the unionists, because the alliance have always been more established within the unionist heartlands. What we saw in the last local election in particular was alliance winning seats in Derry for the first, you know, people only agreeing to vote, or to agree, what was it, a candidate in Derry only agreed to put her name forward a couple weeks before.
She actually went to a meeting to discuss it, and she ended up the candidate.
Yeah, so that tells you something. I was writing about that last week in the Sunday Independent, that there's a narrative that's 20 years out of date in the North here. And it's that, and I remember it from the 80s and 90s. I remember, by the way, reading Jude probably work out who gave it to me out in the parish that me and him share as our home. Gave me the Alliance, I forget what it was called, the Alliance News. I would have got it from a mutual friend of ours in the way back, because I was in as a kid doing my A-level politics in 93 and then 94, 95, those years. And I remember Alliance were scathing of John Hume, absolutely scathing, because Hume didn't want Alliance near the talks. He hated the whole, if you remember the parlance of the 4 main constitutional parties, remember all that rubbish the British Secretary of States would talk about, when they were trying to marginalize Sinn Féin from the talks and have only one nationalist party. And Hume knew that was going nowhere. So you had in that 90s, Alliance really were a liberal unionist party, but they would have got votes from Catholics who might have been nationalists in areas where Sinn Féin and SDLP just didn't run. They had no organization, like East Antrim, like Lagan, they just didn't run. But fast forward 20 years, Anna Lowe ran in 2014 for the European Parliament. I don't know if you both remember, but you know, she did an interview with the Irish News before the election where she said she was in favor of Irish unity.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
You would have a lot, you know, a sizable percentage now of the Alliance vote will be pro-unity.
Are you saying, Chris, that what has been said again and again, that the old divisions of orange and green are breaking down, and that this great swathe of people who want to, neither of them, and that they're going to head towards alliance or maybe the UUP?
No, I think I always say beware of lazy narratives, Jude. You know, this thing that the younger generation all adopt Northern Irish as their identity. Well, can I just ask this question to you? Have you ever, when you see when it's set, and because when this gets floated, they say, you know, this is what's in the census. Now, from my experience, when the census gets filled out, mumsy or dadsy fills it out. They don't get the 3 or 4 kids around them and ask, what's your national identity? What's your national identity? You know, that doesn't happen. So it's a nonsense, this notion that, you know, the younger generation, it doesn't work that way. There are people I know who vote people before profit, who would be much more in terms of conviction for Irish unity than even some people that would vote Sinn Féin. There are people I know who are Green Party, who are much more ideologically Republican than some people that vote Sinn Féin. And there are people who vote Alliance. And sometimes it could be because they like integrated education. Sometimes it could be because they just think the status quo is crap. You know, they just think they want to try. And Naomi Long is such a good communicator. They are not, they're not buying into saying, whoa, ho, we are in neither. You know, it's more complex than that. And particularly when you've had 20 years of essentially, I know there's been on-off times of storming, but it's long enough for people to be disgruntled with the status quo saying, Jesus, nothing seems to get done here. And then I'm going to go for that. It doesn't mean they're buying into some bigger package necessarily.
Well, let me ask you this then. Do you expect the Alliance to gain more seats than, in the first place, the UUP and the second place, the SDLP? Do you expect them to be ahead of both those parties?
I think they probably, well, now, where they're coming from, SDLP sitting on 12, Ulster Unionist on 10, Alliance on 8. I think Alliance have a good chance of coming on top of both the SDLP and Ulster Unionist. Yeah, I mean, I think, put it this way, I think they won't say this, but they'll be disappointed if they don't. You know, I think that, you know, if you look, if we take the SDLP really need to hold Pat Catney's seat in Lagan Valley. And they really need to take Strangford for the first time with Conor Houston. And I actually think they've done a real great job in both those constituencies, because not since I declare my hand, you know, I would have been, I would have had a role in the campaign manager for Paul Butler in Lagan Valley when Paul won a seat for years before that for Sinn Féin. And that was the first time, you know, Sinn Féin won a seat in that constituency. Now, what happened after that was the boundaries were redrawn in a way that didn't favour. So we moved so many areas into West Belfast or into South Antrim. So for Pat to actually win that seat was a very significant advance. I would say not just the individual, but for nationalism, to be honest. It's the type of coalition that's required. So that will be, you know, for the SDLP to come back with their 12 seats, or even to gain one, they would be delighted. And that, you know, Conor Houston and Strangford would be, those two need to come in, and they really need the Sinn Féin vote to transfer en masse, because Sinn Féin vote's going to be minuscule in both, but they'll need those transfers. But they're also going to need broader. Now, if you look across the north elsewise, you know, the SDLP with 12 seats, you know, they're starting from a low base there, but, you know, maybe Fermanagh South Tyrone, they could take one of the Sinn Féin seats. Maybe in West Belfast, they might take one of the 4 Sinn Féin seats. I know there's a lot of talk around Derry, but Pat, I to be honest, I mean, Colin Eastwood's vote was like John Finucane's vote in the sense that he managed to attract a lot of people who mightn't vote for the party because it was Westminster.
In fact, Chris, you just you headed me off at the pass there. I was just about to throw it at you. You know, Alicia McCallan was the sitting Sinn Féin TD or TD. There, I've done it again, MP, and she was at one stage. You thought it was nearly impossible to. There was a juggernaut for Sinn Féin, and suddenly. I actually talked to a few people in the weeks leading up to the last election, and this I might vote for, you know, the SDLP. Who saw 17,100 of a majority for Colin Eastwood? So, like, there's and then look at Fermanagh too in the last general election. What do you call her? Michelle Gillernew. Chris, what she won by, was it 57 votes? So, like, there's all sorts of things. There's something going on, you know, plus and minus, and you sort of go. I'm interested in what you're saying, Chris, because I am so confused these days about. It looks like unionism is in flux, and it looks like Sinn Féin are on the road to, you know, you think it's almost unstoppable. Yeah. But every time you think that, something happens, you know, and that nearly seems to be the way that there's something, you know, like remember the famous, what do you call it, Arlene Foster's crocodile remark, and suddenly, you know, nationalists were absolutely enraged and out they come. So you always wait. I remember Harold McMullen's famous one, events, dear boy, and you're always waiting for something to happen to change everything.
You see, I think you're touching on something that's very important. For that election, the crocodile election, 2017, if you look at the years of elections before that, they were marked essentially by stagnation within nationalism. Nationalists weren't voting. They weren't voting. They weren't happy with what they were saying at Stormont. They thought Sinn Féin were getting rings run around them.
Definitely.
And they were right. And they thought really the party and the SDLP weren't providing anything either. So they just weren't voting. And you had, of course, Michelle, remember, lost the seat too for a while, Gildernew. And you had the overall number of nationalists declining in terms of as a number of MLAs that the two parties would have had together. What happened in 2017 is the DUP, and Arlene Foster in particular, motivated nationalists to come out. And I would just say that, and people's respect for Martin McGuinness and what he had tried to do, and the sense of saying this guy tried something, he got it thrown back in his face. And there was a steely determination to come out. The difficulty, and this is why, it's really touch and go at the moment, that didn't keep going. Look what happened when you came to the European election. Look what happened when you came to the Westminster election. Yes, the SDLP managed to ride on the crest of a wave to get Claire Hanna and Colin Eastwood in. And Sinn Féin did the same with John Finucane. But Sinn Féin, only got in by the skin of their teeth in Fermanagh South Tyrone, and that should not have been that close. And also, and they know this, I've talked to Sinn Féin people, they know if the SDLP had to put any energy into South Down, Chris Hazard could have lost that seat too. So there were, and of course, what happened 6 weeks after that election, Sinn Féin and the DUP were right back in storm at the end because they both didn't like the looks of what was happening. So one of the things that Sinn Féin really need at the moment is they need what's happening. They need the DUP to motivate their base to come out with this arrogant notion that a nationalist can't be first minister, with the talk around the protocol, with some of these protests and the language and the actions. But what I would say, Pat, is that's a precarious position to be in if you're relying on your political opponents to motivate your base.
But that's why, Chris, sorry, that doesn't reflect anything of the polls, the opinion polls. The opinion polls show how is it that you could have 25% of people saying, I'd be in favor of Sinn Féin, and yet you say when it comes to it, they'll be lucky to hold their own or maybe nose ahead in terms of winning seats. Is that because of the division of the various constituencies or what? Because the two don't match. Most people think Sinn Féin will romp home when they look at the opinion polls. You're saying Sinn Féin will be losing seats in some cases.
Oh, I listen. If you talk to Sinn Féin people, Jude, and really, it's just an honest assessment. The 2017 election went almost perfectly. There were constituencies where, Newry Armagh, Mid Ulster, West Tyrone, South Down, which went 4 nationalists, 1 unionist. Now, on another day, that would have been 3-2. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that happened across the board. And then you have other constituencies, the 4 Sinn Féin West Belfast, the 2 in North Belfast, the over in Fermanagh South Tyrone, 3 out of 3 sweep. So what I'm saying is that Sinn Féin know it's going to be difficult to match that because, of course, they had more than 25%. I mean, in 2017, they got 27.9% of the vote. So 25% is actually down. And the other problem is Sinn Féin need a high first preference, Jude, because they don't attract the same number of transfers.
But these opinion polls are crazy then, Chris. They're a waste of time in a way because they mislead people.
Well, they
don't take into account the things that you're putting forward.
Yeah, that's what I said. They give maybe a trend, but Sinn Féin they're acutely aware. Look, I mean, there was maybe 2 other of all the things that could have gone well for Sinn Féin on the day. Everything fell except for 2. They nearly got a second seat in East Derry, and they nearly got a second seat in Upper Bann. Okay, but if you'd have said to them that they hit every other target except those two, they'd have bitten your hand off, and rightly so. So even if you talk to Sinn Féin people now, they'll say, listen, if we lose 1 or 2 seats on the day, we'll be very, very happy. Because for us to be the top party, we know it's more a case of which of the two main parties is going to lose less seats, you know. So if the DUP, if the TUV bite is on, well, then Sinn Féin is going to be the biggest party, because they'll really bite into that DUP. I don't think that you're going to get as much UUP, Ulster Unionist advance from the DUP voter. I think it's more likely the Ulster Unionists.
But could they not, Chris, could the Alliance not nibble at one part, the UUP nibble at another part, and the TUV nibble at a third part? So in other words, they're getting sort of wee bites taken out of them all over the place. So in other words, you could have a lot of maybe 3 unionist parties nearly on a level, and then 1 nationalist party way up.
Well, I don't look. It could happen, Pat, but I think I couldn't see them being on the level, if you know what I mean. I still think the DUP is going to come out as the biggest unionist party, because within unionism, and look, everything tells us that there is a great belief in this idea of, you know, that the top dog, we have to stop the nationalists, Sinn Féin from being top. And nobody out there thinks that the TUV or the Ulster Unionist Party can stop Sinn Féin. Nobody. So the only ones that can are the DUP. So they're the most credible voice within unionism if you're going to go along that argument. So they have that sewn up.
Do you expect the SDLP to continue the improvement that they showed in Derry?
The SDLP, and you know, I said this at the time, a lot of SDLP people were angry at me, Jude, but you know, I made the point at that, it was actually that election.
That doesn't mean you're a bad person, Chris.
I know. Well, but the point I was making, Jude, is the SDLP in 2019, they won 2 seats. They won 2 seats. That was still the second worst Westminster election they'd had in generations, because of course the SDLP held South Down and Foyle for so well. They held those 2, and then of course they had South Belfast for such a chunk at this side of the century that for a long time they were able to hold those 3 seats. Now, so yes, they have gotten better, and they have. And even if you look at the 2017 Assembly election, you know, they came back with those 12 seats. And again, it shows you, you know, the positioning of Colin Meeson at the moment is very interesting. It's not without reason. He knows there needs to be space between him and Sinn Féin to keep that alliance vote that they're worried about losing off. And he also is probably working out that, well, the Sinn Féin voters got no other place to go transfer-wise than to them. They just got to be careful with that, because Sinn Féin voters are like SDLP voters. They're and by the way, it's not a good thing really from a nationalist perspective that there isn't great transfer patterns between the two. It tends, you know, it could end up costing seats within pro-unity camp to unionism, because there's not great, you know, the transfer level between Sinn Féin, the SDLP, and SDLP, Sinn Féin isn't as good as it is within unionism. No,
right, Chris, here's the thing.
5 minutes, Pat. Okay, 5 minutes.
We're under 5 minutes. If you're asked to call it now, what would your read be?
I'd say Sinn Féin maybe 1 or 2 seats more at this moment in time. And that's purely, I'll be honest, it's purely on what Jude alluded to earlier. You know, I put it on Twitter last night, you know, it's like Jeffrey Donaldson can't catch a break at the moment. Every day there's another wee news story which is hitting confidence in him as a leader, whether it's emanating from within his own camp, within the party, you know, but that you just think that salami slicing of his own political credibility and the DUP's over so many years, over so many issues, Brexit protocol, the progressive issues, Stormont, RHI, First Minister stuff, you know, you just think that might yet make some of those TUV people who in the past would have gone back to the DUP, maybe some won't vote, maybe some will stick with the TUV, maybe some will.
Chris, you're saying, if you're put to the pin of your collar, you're saying maybe Sinn Féin by a seat or 2. followed by the DUP, followed by
Well,
UUP
Alliance?
I
Alliance.
personally, again, go back to the numbers. If we had SDLP on 12, Ulster Unison 10, Alliance on 8, but those last few elections, Alliance were, more in the ascendancy within the three parties behind. I wouldn't be surprised if Alliance end up with the third highest number of seats.
And then what? Would the Ulster Unionists presumably would be ahead of?
Well, it kind of depends, because if SDLP can hold that Pat Catney, if SDLP can take Strangford, if SDLP can steal Fermanagh South, one seat in Fermanagh South Throne, one seat in West Belfast, they'll come out maybe where they are or one or two above, which probably would match the Ulster Unionists.
Chris, do you see Deadly Doug taking UUP back up again?
Well, in one sense, the only way is up. If you're sitting as the Ulster Unionist Party that once were the hegemonic, nearly stopped within this half an hour, I must be happy, party within the state and unionism, and you're only on 10 out of 90 seats, it's a great thing for a leader to come in when expectations are so low. So, I think that if he takes 2 seats, it's not even a great election, to be honest, because he should be able to, from a walking position. But more than likely, you'd think they would take a seat or 2 or 3 even,
Well, we're within just about a minute left, Chris. So I think the message from tonight is that those opinion polls are basically rubbish in terms of deciding who's going to the biggest party and in terms of the number of seats. And also that Alliance is probably the most accurate comparison is between the opinion polls for Alliance and the possibility of Alliance seats. Would that be correct?
Well, probably just trend. It gives us more trend. Alliance more likely are going to get a big boost, and Sinn Féin probably at the moment just about pipping the DUP, I'd say.
Your last question, Pat.
Is it really true, Chris? If it was straight past the poll, opinion polls would be more accurate, or first past the poll?
Yeah, I mean, there's good reason to say that, because it's when it comes to those transfers, is when you decide that fifth seat.
Because the problem is,
STB elections.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Chris.
Dr. Collins, we have less than 1 minute.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. That's the most. We'll be playing this tape of you, for the next week at least. We'll be picking it.
Chris, we'll be stealing from this for the next year.
Fire away.
Thanks very much. All the best, Chris. Thank you. Thank you.